Now that we know how to upload file data, we need one more thing before we can store that data in a database. And up till now, all of our queries have been straight text, and we created them using concatenate or heredoc. But if you're storing binary data in a database, you can't just glue up a big string and ship that over to SQL. So there's a way of doing that instead using something called parameter binding. And parameter binding actually has some advantages over what we've been doing in terms of security as well. So even if you're using it for a regular query, you might want to use parameter binding instead of concatenation. And I'm going to start with a simple example. So I'm going to create a new PHP file called test parameter binding. And I'm just going to write some straight PHP code here. So I'm going to create a new database. So that's a new MySQLi, and I give it the host 127.0.0.1 and the username share, password share, and then the DB name share, and then the rest I don't need to supply. And then I'm going to create a regular query. And let's go ahead and do what we did for looking up the username. So this is going to be a select statement where we select the username from users and specify where the email address is some value. So our query is going to be select username from users where email equal, should be capital E, email equal mark.goodman@pcc.edu. So that's just a regular SQL query. And then the old way of doing that would be something like $db pointer query, and then I give it query. And then I get the result set. Call that rs instead for result set. And then results is rs pointer fetch all MySQL ISOsh. And then to display that, I'm just going to go ahead and echo a pre-tag and then print our results and then end my pre-tag. And I'm also going to go ahead and include role here too, just to make it a little tiny bit more complicated so that I can illustrate parameter binding a little better. And then I also want to close the database connection after I have these results. So db pointer close. And then I'm going to test this page. So this is test parameter binding, and it's user facing. So test parameter binding.php, and it works. So here's all my users that have the email address mark.goodman@pcc.edu. So what I'm going to do instead is, instead of including this value here, this is what's going to be specified by the user, and normally I would do something like this. And then I would come in with an unsafe username from a get method, like for example, username is $under get sub username. And then I'd create a safe username like so. So real escape string of username. And then this should do the same thing, except now I can pass the email address in with get method. So we'll go question mark email equal mark.goodman@pcc.edu. And I should escape this to %40, but I'm just going to leave it like so. I think it'll still work. Nope, actually I do need to escape this. %40. Nope, still have an error. So let's go ahead and put a breakpoint and enable debugging. Oh, because it's username. That should be email. Turn off debugging. And this is actually email, safe email, email, and safe email. Okay, so now let's try it. Great, so that works fine. Should work with the @ sign too. Yeah, so that works fine. So now what we're going to do though is instead of embedding this variable in the query, what we're going to do instead is just put a question mark here. And that question mark is basically a special placeholder, and it says that instead of putting a value in the query, I'm going to bind the value of a variable to this value here. And I already have the value that I want to bind, which is this $email. So what I'm going to do is basically a little more complicated. So instead of DB pointer query, I'm going to call DB pointer prepare instead. And this is going to prepare the query for binding this parameter. And this is going to return a statement instead. And then I can bind the statement to a parameter, and that's going to look something like this. Statement pointer bind param. And this takes a couple things. So I have to give the type of the value that I'm binding to this parameter. And there's some different values to choose from. There's S for string and B for binary. So I'm going to use S because I'm going to bind a string value here. And then I give the variable name that's holding the value that I want to bind to that parameter. And I don't need to escape this because whatever value I have here, that's just going to be bound to this right here. And it will not be interpreted as SQL by the backend database, so it's impossible to do any kind of SQL injection. This is safe without actually altering this data in any way. So I'm going to get rid of safe email. Now, after I bound this parameter to this value, I can then execute the statement. So I'm going to call result equal statement pointer execute. And this runs the statement, and it doesn't actually return the results. What it returns is a Boolean value indicating whether the query was run successfully or not. And so I have to do extra stuff to actually get the results. And what I want to do is bind the results as well. So I'm binding this parameter to $email, and then I also want to bind the results to another variable, or two variables in this case, so one for role and one for username. So that's going to look like this. Statement pointer bind result, and then I'm going to give it role and username. So this is saying that since I have two columns coming back, I'm going to bind the value in the first column here and the second column there. And then to read the first value, I execute statement pointer fetch. And I don't have to give this any parameters. It's going to return either true or false, true if it got another row and false if it didn't. And if it did get another role, then it will change the value of these variables. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that line. I'll close the database. And this time I'm just going to echo role, comma, username, username, break. And then I'm going to reload here. And here's my first row. So the role is verified, username is that. Now, you'll notice I'm only getting one row here. If I want to get all of the rows, I have to loop until statement pointer fetch returns false. So that's going to look like this. While statement pointer fetch, meaning I got a new row, then I'm going to echo role and username. And then I'm going to close. So what this is going to do is it's going to read the first row, and if it succeeded, it'll output that value. Then it'll read the second row. If that succeeded, it'll output the value third, and so on. It'll keep going until it tries to read past the end. This will return false, and it'll drop out of the while loop and then close the database. So the first row is Mark Goodman 2 in italics, and here's all of them. Now I can also do the same kind of thing as fetch all was doing before, like so. Result array is an empty array, and then I'm going to add a new array, associative array with the role and the username. And then here, I can do what I was doing before and print our result array. And if I execute this code, I get the same thing as I got before, but now I'm using parameter binding and result binding. So, as I said, this looks a lot more complicated, but it's safer from a security point of view, and also, more importantly, this allows me to embed arbitrary binary data in my query in a way that I couldn't using just a regular query before. Now, sometimes you're going to want to include multiple values in this query. So for example, where email equal question mark and role equal question mark. So here, the first value is going to be an email address, and the second value is going to be a role. And then I'm only going to return username this time, because I already know the role. So let's set role equal to verified. Now in this bind param statement, I have two values I'm binding, email and role, and I just list them in order. So the first one's a string, second one's a string. So I say SS, and then I list email for the first and role for the second. And then in my bind result, I only have one column coming back, so I just put one variable in bind result. And then I'm going to leave this the same, so it will just be the verified users and the print var. So here's one that's not verified, MAR, and if I hit reload, I get the same results, except now I don't have MAR anymore. So that shows that it's actually passing in that verified value as the role in this parameter binding. And I'm going to go ahead and change this to user, and there's all the users.